The thermometer read -71 degrees Celsius. At this temperature, human skin freezes instantly, and breath turns to ice crystals in the lungs. Alone in the desolate Siberian wilderness, 72-year-old Agatha dropped to her knees, waiting for the end. But when a 400-pound Amur tiger emerged from the white mist, she didn't scream. She begged. And what the beast did next would baffle biologists, terrify the police, and change the definition of survival forever. To understand how Agatha Miller ended up on her knees in the deadliest landscape on the planet, you have to understand the silence of Yakutia. In the village of Oymyakon, widely known as the Pole of Cold, silence isn't peaceful. It is a weight. It presses against your eardrums and tests your sanity. Agatha was not a native Siberian, but she had become part of the landscape. A retired geologist from Canada, she had moved to the region 40 years ago for the diamond rush and stayed for the isolation. She lived in a reinforced timber cabin 5 miles outside the village proper, near the frozen banks of the Indigirka River. Locals called her the Iron Baba, a woman who chopped her own wood and drove a battered 1990 Land Cruiser that sounded like a tank. On the morning of the 14th of January 2024, the silence of Agatha's cabin was shattered not by the wind, but by the roar of a snowmobile engine. Agatha was in her kitchen, boiling snow for tea. She wiped the frost from the triple-paned window and narrowed her eyes. She recognized the driver immediately. It was Robert Bobby Miller, her estranged nephew. Robert was the kind of man who wore expensive parkas that looked pristine because he never did any real work. He was 45, deeply in debt to loan sharks in Moscow, and desperate. He believed the rumors that Agatha had hoarded uncut diamonds from her prospecting days, a retirement fund hidden somewhere in the permafrost. He didn't knock. The heavy oak door shuddered as he kicked it, the latch groaning under the impact. Agatha grabbed the flare gun she kept by the stove, a necessity in bear country, but she was 72. Her reflexes had dulled. Robert burst in, a gust of glacial air following him like a specter. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He was holding a heavy wrench. "Where is it, Agatha?" he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "I know you have the cash, the surveyor maps. Where are they? Get out." "Robert," Agatha said, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. "There is no cash. I spent it all on whiskey and books. Go home." Robert wasn't listening. He tore through the cabin, smashing her porcelain, ripping open the mattress, overturning the heavy oak table. When he found nothing, his panic turned to cold, calculated malice. He looked at the thermometer on the wall. Outside, the temperature was dropping rapidly. The forecast predicted a historic low, 71 degrees Celsius, 95.8 degrees Fahrenheit. He grabbed Agatha by the collar of her wool coat. "You're tough, right? Everyone says you're the toughest woman in the valley. Let's see if your memory improves with a little fresh air." "Robert, you can't," she gasped as he dragged her toward the door. "It's death out there tonight." "Then tell me where the diamonds are." "There are no diamonds," she screamed. He threw her out. It wasn't just a shove. He dragged her to his snowmobile, zip-tied her wrists loosely, cruel enough to hinder her, loose enough to give her false hope, and drove her 3 miles deep into the taiga forest, far off the main road. He stopped the engine in a clearing surrounded by black, skeletal larch trees. He cut the engine. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. "Walk home, Agatha," Robert sneered, pointing vaguely south. "If you make it, I'll assume you're ready to talk. If you don't, well, I'll tear the floorboards up without you screaming in my ear." He revved the machine and sped away, the red taillight fading into the swirling white nothingness. Agatha stood alone. She was wearing her indoor boots, heavy wool trousers, and a coat. But she had no hat, no scarf, and no mittens. She looked at her watch. It was 3 p.m. Twilight was already bleeding into the sky. The air tasted like metal. She took a breath, and she felt the familiar, dangerous sting in her chest. The cold wasn't just around her. It was already inside her, hunting for her heart. She began to walk. 1 hour, That is usually the limit for exposed skin at -50. At -71, the rules of biology begin to break down. Agatha walked with a rhythmic limp. She knew the geography of the taiga better than anyone, but the snow had changed the world. Everything was a shade of blue-gray. The cold began to strip away her senses one by one. First, the pain in her ears vanished, a terrible sign, meaning the nerves had frozen. Then, the sensation in her toes disappeared, replaced by the feeling that she was walking on wooden stumps. She kept her head down, counting her steps. 1, 2, 3. Don't stop. If you stop, you sleep. If you sleep, you die. By 4:30 p.m., the hallucinations started. This was common in extreme hypothermia. The brain, starved of oxygen and warmth, begins to fire randomly. Agatha saw her late husband, William, standing by a tree, holding a lantern. "Come on, Aggie," he seemed to whisper. "It's warm over here." "Not yet, Bill," she croaked, her lips cracking and bleeding. "Not yet." She stumbled over a hidden root under the snow and went down hard. The impact knocked the wind out of her. For a moment, she lay there, the snow feeling surprisingly warm against her cheek, the final, lethal trick of the cold. "Get up," she told herself. "Robert wins if you don't get up." She pushed herself up to her knees. That was when she heard the crunch. It wasn't the wind. It was heavy, deliberate. The sound of massive paws breaking through the crusted top layer of snow. Agatha froze. In this part of Yakutia, wolves were the primary threat. A pack would circle, nip, and exhaust you. She fumbled for the pocket knife she kept in her trousers, but her frozen fingers refused to work. She couldn't even unzip the pocket. She lifted her head. 30 feet away, emerging from the whiteout like a ghost manifesting from smoke, was a tiger. It was impossible. Amur tigers, the Siberian giants, rarely ranged this far north. The conditions were too harsh, the prey too scarce. Yet here he was. He was colossal, easily 10 feet from nose to tail. His coat was thick, pale winter gold with heavy black stripes, and his breath plumed in the air like steam from a locomotive. Agatha knew she was dead. If the cold didn't take her, this apex predator would. She was a slow, frozen meal, served on a platter of ice. The tiger stopped. His amber eyes, burning with an intelligence that felt ancient and terrifying, locked onto hers. He didn't crouch in a hunting posture. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply stood there, his massive head lowered against the wind, watching her. Agatha felt a strange sensation wash over her. It wasn't fear anymore. It was a profound, crushing sadness. She was going to die alone. Miles from home, betrayed by her own blood. She slumped back onto her heels, unable to stand. She looked directly at the tiger. "Make it quick," she whispered, her voice a rasping husk. "Please, just make it quick." She fell forward onto her hands, bowing before the king of the taiga. She waited for the impact. The crushing of the neck. The end. But the impact didn't come. Instead, she felt a heat, a radiating, intense warmth approaching her. The crunching of snow grew louder, then stopped right in front of her face. Agatha opened her eyes. The tiger was standing over her. He was so close she could smell the musk of his fur and the raw scent of meat on his breath. But he wasn't attacking. The massive beast lowered his head. He chuffed a low, vibrating sound tigers use to greet one another. Then, he did the unthinkable. He nudged her shoulder with his wet nose, hard enough to rock her back, but gentle enough not to break her. He walked a tight circle around her trembling body and then lay down. He curled his massive frame around her, creating a semicircle of fur and muscle against the biting wind. Agatha stared, her mind unable to process the reality. The tiger was acting as a windbreak. He was shielding her. She looked into his eyes again. There was no aggression. There was recognition. And then, a memory sparked in Agatha's freezing brain. 3 years ago, a trip to the southern border near Vladivostok, a tangled net. A cub, could it be? She reached out a hand, her fingers black with frostbite. and touched the thick ruff of fur at the tiger's neck. He didn't pull away. He leaned into her touch. "Samson?" she breathed. The tiger let out a low rumble that vibrated through the snow and into Agatha's chest. It was a purr, but the moment of connection was shattered by a sound in the distance. Engines. Not one snowmobile. Two. Robert was coming back. And he hadn't come alone. He had realized that if Agatha died out here, there would be an investigation. He needed to make sure she was never found. He was coming to bury the body before the storm hit its peak. The tiger's head snapped up. The purr vanished, replaced by a low, guttural growl that sounded like the earth splitting open. His ears flattened. Agatha struggled to sit up, using the tiger's flank for support. "They're coming," she whispered to the beast. "They're coming to kill us." The tiger stood up, shaking the snow from his coat. He looked at Agatha, then turned his body toward the approaching headlights cutting through the trees. He didn't run. He positioned himself directly between the woman and the machines. Agatha watched as the lights grew brighter. She saw the silhouettes of two men on the snowmobiles. One was Robert. The other was a man she didn't recognize, a hired thug holding a rifle. They slowed down as they saw the shape in the snow. They thought it was Agatha's corpse. They had no idea they were walking into a war zone. The headlights cut through the swirling snow like distinct beams of physical force, blinding Agatha. She squinted, shielding her eyes against the glare, her heart hammering against her ribs not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization of what was about to happen. Beside her, the tiger Samson didn't flinch. He lowered his body into the deep snow, his camouflage so perfect that he effectively vanished. Only the steam rising from his nostrils and the low, guttural vibration in his chest gave him away. To the men approaching, he was just a drift of snow, a shadow among shadows. The snowmobiles ground to a halt 20 yards away. The engines idled, coughing smoke into the pristine air. Robert stepped off the first machine. He looked like a bloated tick in his oversized parka. Behind him, the hired muscle, a man Agatha knew only as Carl, dismounted. Carl was a brute of a man, known in Oymyakon for bar fights and bad debts. In his hands, he held a hunting rifle, a semi-automatic Saiga, illegal for civilian use, but common enough in the black markets of Yakutsk. "I told you," Robert shouted over the wind, his voice thin and reedy. "She's down. Look at the heap. Probably froze stiff an hour ago." Carl spat into the snow. "We check. We bury. We go." "I don't like this place, Robert. The air. It feels heavy. It's just the cold, you idiot. Move." They began to trudge through the waist-deep snow toward Agatha. They saw her slumped form, half buried near the tree line. They did not see the golden death crouching 3 feet to her left. Agatha wanted to scream, to warn them, or perhaps to tell them to run, but her throat was frozen shut. She could only watch as the tragedy unfolded, with the slow-motion clarity of a nightmare. Carl reached her first. He prodded Agatha's leg with the barrel of his rifle. "Hey! Old woman," Agatha groaned, shifting slightly. "She's alive," Carl yelled back to Robert. He raised the rifle, aiming it at her chest. "Finish it? Do it," Robert said, walking closer, eager to see the light leave his aunt's eyes. "Make it look like a wolf attack. Shoot her in the leg first, let them tear." The sentence was never finished. Explosiveness is a trait of the tiger. They do not accelerate, they detonate. From the snowdrift beside Agatha, a blur of orange and black erupted with a roar that hit the men like a physical shockwave. It was a sound so primal, so loud, that it vibrated the fillings in their teeth. Samson hit Carl before the man could even depress the trigger. 400 pounds of muscle collided with the gunman, sending him flying backward as if he'd been hit by a truck. The rifle spun away, landing uselessly in a snowbank. Carl screamed, a high, ragged sound that was immediately silenced as Samson pinned him to the permafrost. The tiger didn't bite to kill. He bit to disarm. His massive jaws clamped down on Carl's thick parka, shredding the synthetic material and snapping the man's collarbone with a sickening crunch. Carl went limp from shock. Robert stood frozen, his brain unable to comprehend what he was seeing. A tiger. Here. Protecting her. Samson turned his massive head toward Robert. The tiger's ears were pinned back, his lips pulled up in a snarl that revealed 3-inch canines stained with saliva. He stepped off the unconscious Carl and began to stalk toward the nephew. Robert scrambled backward, tripping over his own boots. "No, no, get back," he shrieked, fumbling for the flare gun in his pocket. He pulled it out, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He fired. The flare hissed through the air, glowing bright red, but Robert's aim was wild. It sailed harmlessly over the tiger's head and sizzled into a tree trunk. The bright light only served to illuminate the tiger's eyes, which glowed with a terrifying green luminescence. Samson lunged. He didn't maul Robert. He slammed into him, knocking him flat onto the ice. The tiger placed one massive paw on Robert's chest, pressing down with enough weight to make breathing impossible. Robert stared up into the face of the predator, tears freezing instantly on his cheeks. "Agatha," Robert screamed, his voice a broken plea. "Agatha, call it off, please. I'll give you anything." Agatha, summoning the last reserves of her strength, dragged herself upright. She looked at the nephew who had left her to freeze. She looked at the beast who had kept her warm. "Samson," she whispered. The word was carried away by the wind, but the tiger's ear swiveled. She didn't want Robert dead. Not like this. She wasn't a murderer. Even if he was. "Enough," she croaked. The tiger held Robert's gaze for 3 agonizing seconds. He let out a snort, hot breath washing over Robert's terrified face. Then, with a disdainful huff, Samson lifted his paw. He turned his back on the man, the ultimate insult from a predator to prey deemed unworthy of the kill, and walked back to Agatha. Robert didn't wait. He scrambled to his feet, leaving his unconscious partner, leaving the rifle, leaving his dignity. He sprinted to his snowmobile, fired the engine, and tore off into the night, the machine screaming as he pushed it to its limit. Agatha slumped back against the tiger's flank. The adrenaline was fading, and the cold was returning with a vengeance. She stroked Samson's fur. "Good boy," she murmured, her vision tunneling. "Good boy." Then, the darkness took her. The first thing Agatha noticed was the smell of antiseptic and stale coffee. Then, the rhythmic beeping of a machine. She opened her eyes. She was in a white room. Warm air gloriously hot. Dry air was blowing from a vent directly onto her face. "She's awake," a voice called out. A face leaned into her view. It was Dr. Sergei Volkov, the chief trauma surgeon at the regional hospital in Yakutsk. He looked exhausted, his eyes rimmed with red. "Agatha," he said softly, shining a penlight into her eyes. "Can you hear me? Squeeze my hand." She squeezed. It was weak, but it was there. "Miracle," Volkov muttered to the nurse behind him. "Absolute miracle. Core body temperature was 28 degrees when they brought you in. You should be dead 3 times over." "The tiger," Agatha rasped. Her throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. Dr. Volkov paused. He exchanged a look with the police officer standing by the door, Inspector Ivanova. "We need to talk about that, Agatha," the inspector said, stepping forward. "We found you 2 days ago. A local hunter, Viktor, saw the flare. When he got to the clearing, he found you unconscious. And he found the other man, Carl, with a broken collarbone and severe shock." "Where is he?" Agatha asked. "Carl is in custody. He's singing like a bird. He told us everything about Robert's plan. We picked up Robert at the airport in Yakutsk trying to board a flight to Moscow. He is in a mental ward, Agatha." "Mental ward? He keeps screaming about a demon," Ivanova said, flipping open her notebook. "He says a monster tiger breathed fire and spoke to you. We assumed it was hypothermia-induced psychosis. But then, we looked at the scene. Ivanova pulled a tablet from her bag and showed Agatha a photo. It was an aerial drone shot of the clearing where she had been found. The snow was trampled and bloody where Carl had been hit, but it was the pattern in the snow around Agatha's body that silenced the room. There, perfectly preserved in the ice crust, was the outline of a massive feline body. The heat from the animal had melted the snow down to the moss, creating a nest, and leading away from the nest, heading deep into the untracked wilderness, were paw prints the size of dinner plates. The biologists are confused, Dr. Volkov said, cleaning his glasses nervously. Amur tigers don't come this far north, and they certainly don't cuddle with humans. It defies every instinct of the species. Agatha smiled weakly. She looked out the window at the frozen landscape. He wasn't just a tiger, she whispered. She told them the truth then. The story she had kept to herself for years, 3 years prior, while consulting on a geological survey near the Chinese border. Agatha had found a young tiger cub caught in a poacher's steel snare. The mother was dead nearby. The cub was dehydrated, terrified, and thrashing. Any sane person would have walked away or called the rangers and waited. Agatha didn't wait. She had spent 4 hours inching closer, talking to the cub, risking her hands to work the steel wire loose. When the snare finally snapped open, the cub didn't run. He had licked the blood from her hand and looked at her with those same amber eyes before vanishing into the bamboo. She had named him Samson. She never thought she'd see him again. But nature has a memory, and it is far longer than humanity's. Samson had tracked her, or perhaps he had simply been patrolling his expanding territory and recognized the scent of the only human who had ever shown him mercy. The story of Agatha and the tiger went viral. The grandmother of Yakutia became a local legend. Robert was sentenced to 12 years in a penal colony for attempted murder. Carl got 5. Agatha returned to her cabin in the spring. She didn't move away. She reinforced the door, bought a better radio, and continued to live in the silence. But she was never truly alone again. Sometimes, on the coldest nights when the aurora borealis danced green and purple over the Indigirka River, Agatha would look out her triple-paned window, and there, standing at the edge of the forest, a massive silhouette would be watching her. She would raise her hand and press it against the glass. The tiger would dip his head, a silent bow to the woman of iron, and then fade back into the white mist, the guardian of the ice, watching over the one life he owed. They say animals operate on instinct, not emotion. They say a predator sees only meat. But science cannot explain why a 400-pound killing machine would choose to become a blanket for a freezing woman. Perhaps in the silence of the tundra, there is a law older than survival of the fittest, the law of gratitude. Agatha Miller survived the impossible because kindness is the one currency that never loses its value, even at -71 degrees. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button. It helps us find more incredible true stories like this one. Do you think animals truly remember the people who save them? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story of survival. Stay wild. Stay safe.